Good morning, everybody. Here's your daily PowerPoint on what you're going to be completing today. I'm sorry you didn't get PowerPoint yesterday, but by the time we got back from delivering hampers and all the food parcels, it was past 3 o'clock. So hopefully you managed to get on with that, but I will do a quick recap with some of the bits that we covered today. Okay, so today's tasks. What you're going to be doing, you can start off with LBQ, or you can do that at any point during the day. I will set those codes to last until about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, so you can perhaps dip into that and dip out depending on what you've got going on that day. Today's tasks are going to be times tables like we do every day. You're going to have a task on factor pairs, and if we could just remind ourselves what a factor is. Remember, to find your factors, you think about what multiplication tables those numbers are in. So, for example, if we were finding factors of 8, you would start with number 1. You'd think, so 1 pairs with 8, because 1 times 8 gives you 8. So you think, okay, is 2 a factor of 8? Yes, it is. And the pair that goes with 2 would be 4. And you'd continue down until you found all the factor pairs. The final task today is rounding to the nearest 100. So if we're thinking about rounding to the nearest 100, we would always look at the tens column to help you do that. And the code for this LBQ today should have been sent to you via text. If you have any problems accessing those, if you could just drop me a message on Dojo and I can send that to you directly. So My Maths is a website that we have used before, and I've set up some tasks on there for you to be doing in case you finish or you have some extra time during the day. And the tasks are all on multiplication and division. And I've set up a decimal refresher program from last year. So if you're finding some of the decimal work tricky at the moment, you might want to go on to My Maths and have a look. Now, My Maths is really good because along with the questions is some little help pages that go with each question. So if you're stuck, you can click on like a help button and there'll be some guidance for you to go through, so you won't need to struggle. Spelling Shed's all set up as it is usually in class. You've got this week's and next week's spelling set up on there, so you can be practicing both lists. And we will do a spelling test on the Friday when we all come back. The English lesson we'll move on to in a moment. The maths lessons are on separate PowerPoints. Now, we'll post the PowerPoint from yesterday if you found that task hard. So there'll be 2 maths PowerPoints posted today. So just make sure that you look at the right one when you're doing the task. And the final thing that you're going to look at today is guided read. And there's 2 activities for you to do there, depending on whether or not you did yesterday's or not. So the English lesson. We're going to start by thinking about the story, okay? How to Live Forever. What I'd like you to do in a moment, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and I'm going to ask you to write a short summary of the story so far. Now, you're going to use this framed sentence like we used in the autumn term when we were reading Beowulf and Casper, Prince of Cats. So you're going to write your first sentence, this story is about, and that'll be about the setting, the character. It begins with, so what's the first main event? And then it continues with, so what happens next? So what I'd like you to do, I'd like to pause this video and leave that on the screen and have a go at writing your summary. Okay, so let's have a look back at the story all together, see whether or not you remembered the key events. In a quiet street of tall trees, there is a library with 1,000 rooms. On the shelves are copies of every book that has ever been written. But one book is missing. 200 years ago, someone hid its record card under the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, and the book quietly vanished. This book is called How to Live Forever. When the library is closed and the night watchman has fallen asleep in his big armchair, the shelves come to life. Doors and windows appear on the backs of books, lights come on, and the sound of voices drift out between the pages. Full-grown trees spring up and chimneys begin to smoke. Staircases and ladders join the shelves into great cities, and in the distance, small dogs bark. On a shelf of cookery books beginning with Q, in a book called Quincy's lived a family called the Robinsons, a mother, a father, a serious girl called Lucy, and a boy called Peter. Peter was the only person who knew about the missing book. One night his cat Brian chased a mouse into the filing cabinet, and when Peter squeezed in after him, he found the card. When he went to get the book, there was only a dark, dust-filled gap. Peter decided that no matter what he had to do, he would find the lost book. "If I can find it," he said to Brian, "we will never grow old." Every night for the next 2 years, Peter and Brian searched for the book. On the shelves near the empty space, there were books of age-old medicines and healthy books full of exercises and salads. He walked past rows of books with people in leotards leaping about, eating celery and having their thighs photographed. But it was always the same. When he looked closely, they all had wrinkles round their eyes. They were getting older. They did not know about the book. Where's that boy off to every night?" said his mother. "As long as he's not getting into any trouble, it's all right," said his father. Peter travelled from room to room through secret cellars of forbidden books to well-worn shelves of cowboy stories, through silent books of Braille to the street guides of lost cities. And then, on a dark shelf below the ceiling, in a long-forgotten attic, Peter found 4 old men, standing ankle-deep in dust, each balanced on one leg in front of a row of ancient Chinese books. The old men had white hair and deeply lined faces. They surely didn't know about the book. Peter watched them. If it hadn't been for their gentle breathing, the old men could have been statues. "Welcome," said the old man. He put his foot down very slowly so as not to disturb the dust, and bowed. "You're just in time for tea," said the second. He, too, put his foot on the ground and bowed. The third man did the same. The fourth man didn't move, and when Peter looked closely, he saw he was asleep. "We don't get many visitors," said the first old man. "You're the first," said the second. Peter followed the old men into a large, faded book. It was filled with the scent of spices and ancient memories. Beautiful carpets covered the floors, and red lacquered shelves crammed with 1,000 treasures filled the walls. "You've come for this, haven't you?" said the third man, holding out a small book. Peter took it and read the faded words. "How to live forever. Immortality for beginners." Peter couldn't understand it. If these 4 old men had the book, why were they so old? He thought for a moment. "Doesn't work, does it?" he said. "Oh, yes, it works," said one of the old men. "Well, why?" began Peter. "Why are we so old?" "Yes." "Follow me," said the old man, "and I will show you." He led Peter through a door into a Chinese garden. It was the most beautiful place he had ever seen. Delicate trees shivered in a soft breeze. Their blossoms fell in pools of clear water filled with silent fish. Chinese quail picked across the earth, and bright butterflies flew around his head. Peter just wanted to stand and stare, but the old man was walking off down the path. "Where are we going?" said Peter, running after him. "To see the ancient child," said the old man. Peter followed the old man through the trees into a clearing, and there, in a large chair, sat the ancient child. He was both young and old, 10 and timeless at the same time. His skin was as smooth as a child's, but was dull and tired. His eyes were a child's eyes, but they were weary and far away. "This young one has come for the book," said the old man. "You mustn't read it," said the ancient child. "It will drive you mad." "I am the only person," he went on, "who has read it and not lost his mind. I was younger than you when I found it, and I couldn't read it fast enough. Then, while my friends grew up, I stayed like this. They grew out of toys and fell in love. They married and had children, and all I could do was sit and watch. Now, I'm frozen in time. I keep saying that I had everything, but all I had was an endless tomorrows. To live forever is not to live at all. That is why I hid the book. And here you've got your picture of your character. Now, this is the picture that you worked on yesterday where you thought about how the ancient child was feeling and you jotted your ideas around the outside, and I've seen lots of those pieces of work being posted on Seesaw already, which is fabulous. Now, when you've completed that, that's really going to help you because today what we're going to be doing is thinking about a character description. Now, if you cast your minds back, on Monday we wrote a character description for the crab that liked to pinch boats. And what I've done here is I've just posted a very similar version to the shared write that we did together on Monday. So imagine a creature so terrifying, a monster with colossal, razor-sharp pincers, used to pluck defenceless poor sailors and fishermen from the vast body of raging waves. A beast who was so feared by everyone that even the most noble, daring seafarers would not dare venture near it. You would be forgiven for thinking that this horror was a savage beast, but this legend could not have been further from the truth. What I'd like you to do is just pause the video now and just have a think back and see if you can remember what the features were that we were trying to include. The first feature that we tried to include was an Imagine 3. And if you remember there, that's where you start with the word imagine and then you include 3 descriptions. You've got your first one with the imagine, and then we include a semicolon, and then you use your second description, another semicolon, and then you do your third description. So that was the first thing we were looking at, and that was an Alan Peat sentence type because we were trying to include 3 different types of Alan Peat sentences. The other types we included were a boy's sentence, and that was by our use of but, and a 2A sentence, and we actually had 3 examples of those in there. So we had colossal, razor-sharp pincers, defenceless poor sailors, and noble, daring seafarers. The other feature we were looking at was a relative clause, which is sometimes known as a noun, who, which, where sentence, and that was down here. A beast who was so feared by everyone that even the most noble, daring seafarers would not dare venture near it. So it's that extra information there, separated with commas, beginning with the word who. And the final thing we were looking for were powerful adjectives. Now, if you remember, we actually talked as well about how we could add extra information by powerful verbs as well. So I've actually only looked here at some of the descriptions, but you could argue that the word venture, pluck, also added to the descriptive nature of this. So what you're going to do today on the piece of paper where you've got last week's shared writes and you've got the success criteria, what I'd like you to do is have a go at writing another character description for the ancient child. Think about an Imagine 3 you could include. Could you include some of the feelings from your task yesterday? Think about when we did the roll on the wall and you did the description of the ancient child with Mrs. Hardman back on Tuesday. Could you use some of those ideas? Okay, as I mentioned before, your maths PowerPoint is a separate PowerPoint today. It's up to you what order you do these lessons in. But obviously, if you want to pause this here now and do your maths, that's fine. Or you can move on to guided read, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So guided read. So there's 2 bits to this today, depending on how much you did yesterday. So we started earlier in reading It's a Jockey's Life. Okay. We've already done the vocabulary and we've already done the literal questions on the orientation. So what I'd like you to do today is just do a quick fluency recap. Thinking about reading aloud for fluency. How can you make your reading expressive? Now we know to do that we need to include those 6 P's. I'm just going to recap what those 6 P's are. So the first one is about your pitch. Should you read it high or low? Are you making your voice musical? Does your voice rise and fall? What tone do you use? Punctuation is your second P. What punctuation marks do you recognise? And how do they dictate how do you read? And why is the writer use them? So for example, if you can see speech marks, does that tell you perhaps you need to change your voice slightly? If there's a question mark at the end, How does your speech change at the end? Your voice usually goes up slightly to show that it's a question. An exclamation mark might show that you need to raise your voice. How you use a pause for the third P. When should you pause? And that will link also to your punctuation. For how long? For what purpose? Are you doing it for a breath or are you doing it for a dramatic pause? Your next P is passion. So can you use emotion in your voice? Are your listeners excited by your reading? That is so important, isn't it, to get your readers really interested in what you're saying. If you're very boring and monotone, it sounds like you're lacking in empathy and expression. The fifth one is power or volume. How loud or quiet is your voice? Why are you doing it like that? Are you doing it deliberately? Can your audience hear you? Do you need to stress certain words? Are you emphasizing them? Why might you do that? And the last one is pace. How fast are you speaking? When should you speed up or slow down? And why is that? Do you think really fast readers are the best? So what I'd like you to do is have a go at reading that A Jockey's Life again. Have a go at practicing it. And then when you think you're really confident at reading that, use your tablet, record yourself reading, then post it on Seesaw for me to have a look at. And I'll have a look at how well you've done those 6 Ps. Once you've done that, you can look at the question sheets. Now you know the strategies for answering those questions. You know you go back and text mark and you underline your question stems. So once you've done those things, you can have a go at doing those day 3 questions. And I can see that some of you have already posted that on Seesaw already, which is fantastic. Just make sure that you have used those strategies that we would normally use in class. Now, for those of you that have already done that yesterday, there's a second text in there for you called Rumplestiltskin. Now, this is the challenge text for the week, so we know that these are tricky. These are the ones that we usually do on Thursday and Friday in class. So I just want to remind you of the process. The first thing that you do is read the text. As you're reading the text, you will need to underline the words or highlight them that you're not sure about. Now, normally we would discuss those in class, wouldn't we, about the context. Now, we started last week using the tablets to find the meanings and jot down the meanings there. So what you'll need to do today is use your tablet or your PC, whatever it is you've got to use, to enter some of those words and find out what they mean. And then you can annotate your text to help your understanding. One thing that you do need to do there is think where a word has got more than one meaning, which is the right one. Now, you work that out by reading it in context and thinking, which of those meanings makes sense in that situation? Once you've done that, you'd number the questions as normal, and then you're going to answer them. Ideally in full sentences, however, I do know that space might be restricted on that sheet, so just do the best you can. So let's just look back at today's tasks that we've talked about. We've talked about the LBQ tasks. We've reminded ourselves what factor pairs are. We reminded ourselves that when we round into the nearest 100, we look at the tens column. We reminded you about the availability of My Maths to do some tasks there, and reminded you to use your spelling shed in preparation for your spelling test next week. We've been through our English lesson, which is we looked at the shared right and what you can do for your character description today. I've reminded you that the maths is an additional PowerPoint, of which you've got 2 today, and we have been through guided read, and there's 2 tasks there if you haven't done yesterday's. I'm looking forward to seeing lots of work on Seesaw, and if you've got any questions, please do message me on Dojo. See you soon.